Hello, everyone. Come on in. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds to join on in. Excellent. Well, I'm Victoria and I'm here supporting. So we want to thank you today for joining Empowering Parents, Navigating Your Child's Educational Rights. All right. So, as we get started, we have a list of wonderful presenters here for you today. And so, we're going to go ahead and get started very shortly. We want you to know if you have any questions, please write your questions in the Q&A box, okay? So you should see on the screen a Q&A box. If not, we also have the chat activated if you would like to drop your question in there as well, all right? So have a lot of wonderful information for you. So we're going to go ahead and get started and hand things over to Dr. Linda. Dr. Linda, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Victoria.
All
Appreciate you.
right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this empowering webinar on navigating your child's educational rights, including IEPs and 504 plans. My name is Dr. Linda Wright Gittens, and I am the founder and executive director of Babies, Youth, and Children's Empowerment, Inc. For the past 15 years, we've proudly served students across HISD, Fort Bend ISD, Pearland ISD, and several other school districts. Over 12 of those years, we have provided tutorial services, including college prep, to help students achieve academic success. This webinar is live, and we love to hear where you're joining from. So please share in the chat your city and state. Oh, Las Vegas, awesome. Helene, wonderful. Spring, Austin, great. Now also add in there, we're excited to provide valuable insights and to guide you in understanding and addressing your children's educational needs. So make sure you get a pencil and paper and be handy to take down some good notes and also write down your questions. Can you also put in the chat and share with us your child's learning diagnosis so that we can understand our audience? And also write if you have an IEP or a 504, or you're just waiting on services. Okay. ADHD, 504, IEP, dysgraphia, continuing requirement training. Okay, okay, awesome. At the end of this webinar, we'll ask you to complete a survey. Your feedback is invaluable in helping us tailor future sessions, improve our delivery, and better understand your needs. So also I've placed in the chat, and I'll place it again, a link to the free 121-page workbook of resources. And so you can download that now and go through it as you're listening or make notes, or just download it at your leisure. I will also email it to you after the end of the webinar, so you'll have it in two places. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Got to do slides there. Okay, we're honored to have a team of distinguished experts with us today, and I want to share who they are. We have attorney Tamisha Beckett, and she will cover the Individual Disability Education Act, the IDEA, and your rights under this law. Dr. Barbara Garden, she will discuss what to do when your child is struggling, including general educational support, the IEP process, and behavioral support strategies. Lakeisha Lewis will explain the diagnostic evaluations and assessments, a crucial step in understanding your child's needs. Dr. Ada Osorio will provide insights into special education and 504 plans. Adrian Gay, an advocate, and she will explain the vital role of advocacy in securing the best outcomes for your child. Veronica Gilmore Ford will guide you on managing your child's important dates and documents to stay organized and proactive. I'll return at the end of the session to discuss opportunities for hands-on assistance and one-on-one consultations and announce the winners of our selected prizes. Let's get started. I will turn it over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. So, kicking us off, we have Tamisha Beckett, JD.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamisha. Thank you for the introduction. Currently, I'm a Chief Compliance Officer in the healthcare space, but I have experience in education, oil and gas. And so my role today is to assist you guys with the legal requirements. I have experience with all federal agencies and state agencies as well. So my experience is very keen in the legal compliance space on how to follow regulatory requirements. So that's what I'm here for, and I'll just turn it over back to the moderator. Okay, so first we're going to start off talking about your rights and the school rights under the IDEA standard. So here, the IDEA standard requires schools to provide parents of a child with a disability with a notice containing an explanation of the procedural safeguards available underneath the IDEA. So what this means is they're supposed to give you this, and you're supposed to receive it at a certain time frame. So you should get it one time per school year. And there are certain times when they are supposed to give it to you. So as you can see on the screen, the 4 times is upon initial referral or parent request for evaluation. The second is upon receipt of the first state complaint and upon receipt of the first due process complaint. So if the parent has a complaint. And then 3, in accordance with the discipline procedures, so if there's any type of disciplinary actions that needs to occur, or if there are some issues that you have with your child, and also just a general request by a parent. So these are the rights that you that you have and that you should receive from the school if your child has a disability. You can go to the next slide. So here, I think this is critical for everyone to know is that under the IDEA, the law states, and so I know there's people from multiple states here, but these are federal standards. So this would apply in every state. There would be some deviations on a state level. So I just advise you to work with your school, and in the state, there may be some slight variations here, but ultimately it's a federal standard. So a lot of this stuff would apply. But under the notice, there are 7 key elements that the notice should contain. And you have to make sure that the notice is proper. So they have to give you a description of the action that they actually propose to refuse or take, right? They also have to explain why are they refusing to take an action. They also have to give you a description of each evaluation procedure, assessment, report, the statement that the child has a disability and their protections underneath the law and any procedural safeguards. They need to give resources to the parents to contact to actually help the parent understand all of their rights as well. They also need to give descriptions of any other options that the team considered and the reasons why those were rejected, and descriptions of any other factors. So basically, what this means is they have to give you prior notice underneath the law. They have to meet these standards. The parents have to consent that you agree or that you received it in writing. And then from there, in other slides, we'll talk about exactly what you need to do from there. So under the prior notice, it has to be given to you at least 5 school days in advance. So if you don't get it prior to 5 school days, then you need to basically contact the school and let them know that they violate the standard. So you have a right to receive information in writing for certain reasons. So basically, here it is. You can talk about on the slide if the identification of your child, right? If they have a special needs or additional information, if you would like evaluation, or if you like a placement of your child, or how is the child provided a free, appropriate public education. So underneath here, all these things must be in writing. So they just have to kind of tell you in writing and give you prior notice of what you need. So the next slide. So when do you expect to receive the safeguards notice? So like we were saying here, they need to give it to you at the onset. And so if you file a complaint or if you ask to review your child's record and you don't get this notice, then it's an issue. So when there's something that initiates it, you need to receive it. And so you also can get a copy and request a copy for your record. So basically, anytime that there's some type of change or evaluation, you should get a notice. And if you don't, contact the school or the district to make sure they're following the standard. You can go to the next slide. So we kind of talked about this. What does the procedural safeguard notice contain? So it actually contains a lot. It'll contain, of course, the independent education evaluation. So if there's any type of evaluations for your child, again, we talked about the prior notice. It'll have your consent. It'll also contain your educational records for your child. So you should make sure those are accurate. There's also the availability of mediation. So if there are some disputes that might occur. So if you look at this page, these are certain things that the safeguard must contain. They can tell you about any potential civil actions or due process hearings that you might need in place. So just to make sure that your notice give you the opportunity and the resources that you need to make sure you can defend your child. The next slide. So if you do not understand the notice that they give you in your state, you can actually research. There's a link called the PTI surveying your area, and this is like Find Your Parent Center. So there's a Find Your Parent Center page. Every state should have it. This is for Texas, but in your state, they should have it. If not, this link can probably direct you to where you need to. And then there are people who can explain what the notice is, what the process is, what's going on. And so it's additional resources that you can actually have. So each state actually has at least one PTI, and that's critical, and it helps you to identify any questions that you might have. So now let's get into educational records. So the IDA and other federal laws protect the confidentiality of your child's educational records. And so these safeguards address the following aspects. So the use of their personal identifiable information, so their birthday, their social security, what they're diagnosed with, all those things are protected. And they have to make sure that they only give it to who you as a parent want your child record to be released to. So that's critical. And the parents have a right to inspect their child's education records, and you can actually request to amend it, which we'll talk about it later. So if you feel like your child's rights have been violated, we'll talk about it later. There's some recourse for you, but you want to make sure that your child's privacy is very protected, because ultimately you don't want any information to get out that could potentially harm your child or can go against a decision that you want to make as a parent. The next slide. So here's some of your rights versus the school rights. So your parents, as a parent, you can expect and review your educational record with respect to your child's evaluation, identification, and placement, and the provisions of FAPE. So if you're not familiar with FAPE, basically, give me 2 seconds. It's actually a federal standard that allows every parent to review certain standards and to make sure that the school is actually adhering to your child's needs. You can actually request explanations and interpretations of the record. So let's say there's something that's ambiguous in the standard, you can actually request them to review that information, because under the FAPE, they have to provide appropriate public education and special education to meet the needs of your child. And so that's required. The parents can also request copies of the record. If you're not receiving copies effectively, you need to let them know. You can also request that the representative be given access to inspect and review the records. So let's say you have your attorney that you like, hey, I think there's some issues. You can actually request that as well. So the The school rights must comply with the parent's request to inspect and review records without unnecessary delay. So under the law, typically legal terms is 30 days. However, you might need to talk to your district and the state to see what they mean by reasonable delay. Reasonable delay could possibly be 30 days, it can be 15 days. So you just know, typically it's no more than 45. They must respond to reasonable requests for explanations and interpretations of the record. So if you have questions and they only respond to certain aspects, you need to actually contact them back and say that all of your requests have not been assessed. The schools can charge a fee for copies of records made for parents, so don't be alarmed for that. But the fee cannot prevent you from exercising your rights. So if it's a bogus fee and it's, very cumbersome, then you have a right as a parent to say that you're preventing me from having record access because of the fee. And they cannot charge a fee for searching or retrieving a child's record. So, but they can do copies, but they can't charge you a fee for searching. The next slide. So, parents' rights to ask for the records to be amended. So, basically, how do you do that? Why would you do this? So, if you believe that the information contained in your child's records, for example, is inaccurate, if it's misleading, or if it violates the rights, then you can say, hey, I would like my child's record amended. And then you give the reasons why. However, the agency must decide within a reasonable amount of time if it's going to comply with your request. So it's not an automatic guarantee, but at least you have a recourse to amend. If they actually decide to refuse your request to amend, right, they have to inform you and indicate their right to ask for a due process hearing on the matter. So if they refuse your right to amend, then there's a due process hearing. You can say, I would like a due process hearing on this. And if you as a parent decide to dispute the school system decision and due process hearing, you have a right to present evidence that demonstrates why you think your child amended record should be granted. You also have a right at your own expense to be assisted by a representative selected by you, your attorney, whoever you think is the expert in the field. So just know that you have those rights. The next slide, you can move on to next slide. Additional rights after the hearing, for example, the educational agency must issue its determination in writing within a reasonable amount of time. So again, we talked about this reasonable amount of time could be different based on the state that you're in. Typically, it's 30 days, no more than 45, but just make sure you check with the district and the school to see exactly what their time frame is. And if the result of the hearing is favorable to you, then the school must amend your child's record and inform you in writing that it has done so. And so you can also ask for an inspection. On the other hand, if the result of the hearing is not favorable to you and is not accurately reflecting what you want, right, is still violating your rights, then you have a couple other options that you can do. So the school, again, must inform you that, hey, we're not amending this. That's just not what we're going to do. And then you can dispute it again, and we'll talk about additional resolutions going forward. So on the same slide, sorry, you can go back one. The same slide, it talks about you can participate in meetings relating to your child. So there's informal dispute resolutions, which we'll talk about informal, but it's always great to just kind of like get a call and just discuss that. And but so you can know, you also have a right to participate in multiple meetings. So whatever meetings that they have regarding your child, individualized educational program, right? You have a right to be present, to review, to develop, to revise, all of that. Now, there's a difference. There's certain standards. They say there's a difference between a meeting and a formal meeting and an informal discussion. So you got to make sure you understand the two, because the school can say, no, we're not calling a meeting. We're just having internal discussions. And so under the law federally, they're stating guidance is out there stating that they don't have to invite you to those. So I would just say, just talk to the school, your district, and your state to try to see what meetings are they willing, not willing per se, but that they will have so that you can attend. You also have a right to be a part of any group that determines if the child is a child with disability. So before they evaluate your child, or when they actually say your child's a disability, you can actually be included in those meetings, because you want to make sure that your child disability aligns with what you or your physician, because oftentimes, for example, you may have a school or school district who might misdiagnose or might say that, hey, I think your child has this, but if you go to their provider, it could be something different. So you want to be present to make sure your child is represented effectively. You can also be a part of any IEP teams which develop reviews and revises the IEP for your child, and any group that makes decisions related to the educational placement of your child. So whether that's the principal, the teacher, the district, you have a right to be involved in any of those meetings. Um, so you can change to the next slide. So before we get into this, we'll talk about there's additional educational records in regards to disciplinary actions. So the state can require the school system to indicate in a child's record a statement of any disciplinary actions that the child has had. And you want to make sure that those type of disciplinary actions does not hinder the school from giving your child resources. So in the event they had something happen a month ago, but your child need additional resources, you want to make sure that just because they documented that they're not using that as a way to prevent resources for your child. So you need to make sure you look into that and assess that properly. So they can also talk about any conduct and any issue that was taken up. So when must the school ask for a parent's consent? You can go to the next slide. So there's a couple things. So the school can ask for a parent's consent. There are certain times when the school must ask for your permission as a parent before it takes any actions. So before they conduct the initial evaluation of your child. So let's say your child is acting out in class and they're like, oh, we think something is going on. Before they evaluate your child or assess them and say, I think this child has X, Y, and Z, and they start making arrangements at the school, they need to talk to you first, because they need to make sure that they have your consent to do it, and your consent must be in writing. So no verbal, you have to physically put it in writing. Um, Before they conduct a reevaluation of your child. So in the event this year, let's say they can conduct evaluation of your child, and then in 6 months they want to reevaluate to see where your child is, to see if they want to make some modifications. You still need to be included and have your consent in writing. Before providing special education related services to your child, this kind of goes with the first 2 points, because you don't want your child to be potentially stigmatized for a certain disability that they really don't have, that it could be something different from what, you as a parent and their physician actually believe their disability is. And before inviting representatives of other agencies to participate in any meetings in regarding your child. So you don't want the state or the board involved until you have given permission and you're present. So when must the school notify the parents? And we'll get into the disputes shortly. I just want to talk about high level, but the school must notify the parents about any upcoming meetings. So typically they make a meeting for the calendar for the whole year. So there should be meetings that they already have out. So you need to ask for any upcoming meetings. They should give that to you, in any scheduled meetings. And you guys must mutually agree on the time. So the law states that if you don't consent in writing that you're going to attend these meetings, they can continue on and having these meetings without you. So there's not a violation. But they have to actually work with you and try to call you, email you. But of course, if you don't respond, then they can continue on. So you want to be cognizant of that and pay attention to any invites. And because if you decline, they can continue on. Um, so here, what happens if you disagree again? So we're going to talk about the resolving disputes. So let's say when you go through these issues, these evaluations, you disagree with the plan, you disagree with anything, accommodations, you have formal approaches and informal. So first we'll talk about formal. So let's say after you tried to work out the disagreements, you had meetings, you attended all these team meetings, you can ask for mediation. You can also ask for a due process complaint. And that's where you communicate in writing with the school system and describe the provision that you feel has been violated. There's a resolution process, which begins when the school system receives your due process complaint, which includes a resolution meeting between the parents and the relevant members. So again, this takes you back to like a meeting. There's a due process hearing that can occur, And then you can file a state complaint. And you can communicate in writing with the state education agencies, whatever that is within your state, you can do that. And they must resolve your complaint within 60 days. So the informal approaches, which we kind of talked about some, is the IEP review. So at that meeting, the parent and the public agency can discuss the parent's concerns, and hopefully you guys collaborate. So hopefully, you can outside of you sitting down and having a meeting, you can say, now I would like an IEP review. So you can specifically identify that as an informal dispute process. The other thing that you can ask for is facilitated IEP meeting. It's not required, literally in multiple states. Underneath the federal standard, is not a requirement. And so, because some schools don't have facilitators, they don't have the resources to have someone there to facilitate. It's almost like a mediator. But you can ask if the school actually have facilitated IEP meetings. Not every school has it. It's not a requirement. But all schools does not address this. So you can also ask there. And so these are typically your rights, and you can go to the next slide after this. So, like I stated earlier when we first started, these are federal standards, so they apply across the board, every state. But here is just telling you that you need to work with your state and local school district, because a lot of them establish their own mechanisms. So it can be different from what we talked about today. But however, make sure those policies and procedures are consistent with the IDA standard. So it needs to still be consistent with the federal standard, but they may include additional details that's important for your state to help with your child. But that's what I have today. If you have any questions at the end, we can talk more about it.
Thank you, Tamisha. Up next, we have Dr. Barbara Gordon.
Hi, everybody. So I am a retired school psychologist. I had about 20 years of experience working in the Katy Independent School District outside of Houston. I have a PhD in clinical psychology with an emphasis on developmental psychology. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. What we are going to talk about is actually the process that takes place before what you just heard about. And that is, what if your child is struggling in school, and how do I get them the help that they need in the different areas? So the first thing to know is, next slide, please, Victoria. The first thing to know is that there is a process in place for getting your child interventions while they are still in general education. Different districts have different names for it, but the federal umbrella is RTI, or response to intervention. Response to intervention is a method of providing academic, and or behavioral supports to children while they are still in the general education setting. So this is available to all students, whether they are in the referral process, whether you ever intend to request a referral or to agree to a referral for special education. It's available for all students. And progress is monitored using specific data. So in the plan, there should be an indication of what kinds of information will be collected and how it will be used to determine whether the child's academic or behavior difficulty is improving. And interventions are adjusted based on the student's response. So, for example, if your child is receiving additional reading support in the classroom with the classroom teacher, and that's not proving adequate, they might be provided with a pull-out program where reading instruction is more targeted. Next slide, please. Okay, so response to intervention is provided in tiers, and there are 3 levels of support. The first one is called universal support, and these are classroom or school-wide supports that are available for all students. So many schools or many classrooms have a school-wide or classroom-wide reward system where they reward for group work or certain behaviors. And so those are provided for the entire classroom, for example. Another one is CHAMPS. It is a program designed for the general education teacher to provide consistent and clear classroom expectations and consequences when those expectations are not met. Tier 2 is targeted support, which means that it's provided to an individual student. So, for example, one example of a targeted support might be classroom accommodations for an individual student. Let me talk for a second about the difference between accommodations and modifications. A modification changes the curriculum that the child is presented with. So, for example, if they are getting instruction below their current grade placement, that would be a modification. If they are provided homework with fewer items, that would be a modification. An accommodation would be something like preferential seating, where they're seated near the teacher so she can redirect the child's behavior, or small group instruction in reading. So it's still on grade level, which makes it an accommodation, not a modification. So you'll hear both terms. And tier 3 is intensive support, and that is individual targeted support for a student with a greater need. And one example might be assistance with organizational skills. So there might be a particular plan in place for a child who's having difficulty, say, keeping up with their materials. Next slide, please. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Up next, we'll have Dr. Ada Osorio.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the intro. I am Dr. O, the owner of AOD Educational Services Group, where we provide support and training for families throughout the process of SPED and 504. So today I will be discussing 504 with you all. Next slide, please. So we will review this process, the 504 meeting, the documentation, and the plan. Before we jump into that, let's briefly discuss what 504 actually is. So it's part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which protects students with disabilities in schools. Now, to be eligible for 504, the person must have a physical or mental impairment that limits major life activity, which includes caring for yourself, walking, seeing, speaking, breathing, learning, and performing tasks. These plans cover students throughout elementary, high school, and on to college as well. Next slide, please. So getting the process started, there is a referral completed by the parent or the school staff. When the referral is put in, the school, every school district operates differently as far as the amount of time they have to respond to those referral requests. According to the state of Texas, as long as it's within the 30-day window. But once that referral is put in, parents receive consent to have a data review, a data evaluation on that student. And in that data evaluation, the school is looking at maybe a doctor's note that was provided. They're looking at grades, behavior concerns. They're looking at attendance. They're also looking at parent input and teacher feedback as well. Some examples of things that would qualify a student for 504. Typically, you find that with our ADHD students. A big heavy wave was also our dyslexia students, but please note dyslexia is no longer being serviced under 504. So if you do have a student who has dyslexia and they are still under the 504 umbrella, your school should have communicated with you their plan to transition them over to special education, which they would have to complete another evaluation. So please check with your school if you have not received that communications. You'll also see things like kidney diseases, asthma, anxiety, depression. So things of that nature that are impacting the student's abilities within the school, they could qualify for a 504 plan. Next slide, please. So after that data review, the results are in, what happens and who attends these meetings? So the person who can make the placement decision, which could be your principal, AP, counselor, district personnel, the person who is knowledgeable about the student. So you have your parent, teacher, counselor, behavior specialist, depending on what the impairment is. And then the person who can interpret the evaluation, which is typically the 504 data review committee, which they met prior to this meeting. So a representative from that meeting will be at your initial 504 meeting as well to review what the findings were. Next slide, please. So the 504 plan. So this is the documentation that you will have access to. So going back to that listed data sources, again, that's the parent and teacher input, the grades, behavior incidents and attendance, the committee decision. So was there a decision to move forward with a 504 plan, or are we not? Description of the physical or mental impairment and the major life activities that are limited due to that impairment, and then the accommodations. So one of the big things to note, the difference between 504 and IEP, while both provide accommodations, IEPs offer specialized instruction. So you see that like the push-ins and the pull out, the resource, that type of thing. But for 504, we're simply offering accommodations. And you want to make sure that the accommodations that the school is proposing are accommodations that are your students' how can I word this? Their exact needs, because oftentimes we see 504 plans that are kind of generalized, right? Like preferential seating or extra time and whatnot. While those accommodations are good, you want to make sure that the school is providing the exact needs of your child. Next slide. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O. Up next, we have Lakeisha Lewis.
Well, that came very quickly. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool beans. So yeah, I've been doing this a long time. Please forgive my thick New Orleans accent. I cannot help that. Sorry about that. So I've been been an educational diagnostician for a long time, like 17 years. And before that, I was a SPED teacher and a dyslexia interventionist and a whole lot of other interesting stuff. So let's get to the FIE. After you've done all that we all can do, we make a referral to SPED. After everything that the school can do has been done, we make a referral to special education because that should be the absolute last option. So the FIE is a comprehensive evaluation to determine if a student qualifies for special education. The purpose of it is to identify strengths and challenges that the student may have. Okay. And of course, the child has to qualify for special education under specific federal and state guidelines. The evaluation literally provides a complete picture of the student's strengths, challenges, needs, and it helps the school kind of develop personalized interventions specifically tailored to the student. Okay. I guess next slide. It's going so fast. So who conducts that FIE is a team of specialists, a diagnostician like myself. I'll do like educational testing. I'll do cognitive or IQ testing. I'll do adaptive behaviors testing. We'll have a school psychologist on the team if we have a behavioral issue. Sometimes we'll have a speech and language pathologist. They'll look at language, speech, pragmatics, and all these other areas that I am not that familiar with. And it kind of depends on other areas that need to be evaluated. We might need a deaf and hard of hearing specialist. We may need a OT or a PT. Just depends on what the student has been referred for. Okay. Of course, we talked a lot about parental consent. So before anything is done, we have to give parents consent. The school does have a responsibility to reply to you about whether they're going to proceed with an evaluation. I just want y'all to know schools do not necessarily have to do an evaluation. They can decide to kind of stop services not stop, sorry. They can decide not to refer because they want to get further data. Let me give you an example. For a baby, a child with dyslexia, or who we suspect has dyslexia, there are what we call exclusionary factors. An exclusionary factor is something like your student needing glasses, a student that can't hear, a student that has trauma, or a student that's absent multiple days of school. All of these things are what we consider to be exclusionary factors, which could be impeding on your student's progress. So we, unless those things are cleared up, we usually won't evaluate for dyslexia or specific learning disability. But let me go back. Schools typically have to respond to that, your referral suggestion or request within 15 days. Of course, that depends, district to district, it kind of changes. Once that evaluation and consent is signed, the evaluation should be done in 45 days. If we are going to proceed with it, after that 45-day evaluation, we need to hold a meeting. That's about this, and we have to do that in 30 days. I just want to put a little caveat in there. 45 days does not mean 45 calendar days. That means 45 school days. So I'm urging you to not run in there looking at a calendar and say, hey, I counted 45 days and I still don't have an evaluation. We're not talking about calendar days, we're talking about school days. School days meaning when schools are open. We don't count weekends, we don't count holidays. We're talking about school days. So it's really important that your students do come to school, because some districts will allow diagnosticians, evaluators to add on days if your student is missing school, because it extends the evaluation a whole lot. I'm sorry, could you move to the next screen? I'm just talking. Y'all see, that's my favorite thing. You can move that one too. I just covered all of that. Okay. So what happens during an IEP meeting? Well, we are going to evaluate your student in all areas of concern. And that means, yes, we're going to get that vision and hearing. We're going to look at their early development. We're going to look at communication, social functioning, emotional functioning, physical and motor skills if necessary. I will give a achievement test, assessment of the curriculum, which is measuring usually math, reading, writing, all of these areas. If we're looking at an LD, it'll give me certain indicators to qualify a student in that area. So we use observations, standardized testing, interviews, and a lot of our information does come from parents. So it is extremely important that if the school is asking you to participate, or we give me all of this paperwork to fill out, we need it because it has to be a part of a full evaluation. We need it, especially when we're talking about interviews. If you have a baby with you suspect autism, you might have a psychologist contact you and they're going to be asking for a lot of personal information, because all of that information is pertinent when you're looking at autism. So y'all just be advised, it's a long process, and we're doing that because we're trying to get really accurate information about your student. Okay. Going back, after the evaluation is done, we get to the eligibility part. I need to note that the FIE does not necessarily determine eligibility. That's really decided at the ORD. We are just providing a piece of documentation telling you what the kid can qualify. Of course, you know, it's a spectrum, it's a whole bunch of differences, but the ORD committee, which will include a diagnostician, decides eligibility services. Oh, I'm not going to say. Okay, so some of the common categories are specific learning disability. Dyslexia falls under under specific learning disability in Texas now. Of course, in some states, it's always fell under specific learning disability in reading. But it's really because of money issues. It was 504, which is a regular education function. Now it's special education, which means it's federal, and now we can get governmental money to pay for it. Speech and language is also a common impairment. If your baby have articulation deficits or issues with expressive language, meaning they can't appropriately express themselves, or receptive language, meaning they can't appropriately understand language, they can qualify in that area. Sometimes they can qualify in multiple areas. You can move to the next slide. Sorry about that. Okay, that's just about pre-supports. Now, y'all, I can talk about these eligibility categories a long time. The really, really good news is now Texas is allowing us to do something I have been doing in Louisiana and Mississippi for years. It's called developmental delay. They finally added that as a part of the eligibility, which means we can look at your child who may be 4, 5, 6, up to the age of 8, right before they turn 9, and give them a general diagnosis or eligibility, and try to see what is going on with them before we give them a categorical. Let me explain. Developmental delay is a general disability area that's not absolutely clear. But when we go move to categorical, those are things like specific learning disability, autism. Basically, we can use developmental delay to get a whole lot of information about that student until we give them something categorical, which is a really good idea, especially for 4 and 5-year-olds that haven't had exposure to school. Because you really don't want anyone calling a child a certain eligibility. And then we get to the time where they change 9 and the eligibility is changing. Because typically it should not change. It could change because of improvement, but typically a student with intellectual disabilities shouldn't be called autistic by the time they turn 9. And we could talk about that more if anyone is interested. So all of these are just resources for parents. I figure y'all gonna want that if you want a referral. So I guess next slide. We already talk about all that. Y'all, I get so passionate in talking about my FIEs. I guess y'all can see that I will just keep on going. But what I can tell you that's really important, and I have to say this, please participate with your school. Please make sure your child goes to is present. We can make this process so much easier. So y'all have any other questions? I am here because it's my time to be quiet.
Thank you, Lakeisha. All right, so we have coming back Dr. Barbara.
Okay, so let's talk about the individualized educational plan. Let me back up for a second because some of you are from out of state. After the assessment is completed, there has to be a meeting, and participants have to include one administrator, one diagnostic assessment person, one instructional person, and the parent. In some states, this is called an ARD meeting, which stands for admission, review, and dismissal. So you will hear that term. You're being invited to an ARD meeting. You will also, in other states, hear them referred to as IEP meetings. So don't get confused. They're the same thing. In some states, those terms are used interchangeably. They are not. In Texas, the committee is referred to as the ARD committee, admission, review, and dismissal. But you'll hear IEP meeting in other places. So the purpose of this meeting is to determine whether or not your child qualifies for special education services. There are two parts to eligibility. One is the assessment. The assessment determines whether your child has a disability or not, but the committee determines if, because of that disability, the child needs the services that can only be provided through special education. So your child might, for example, have been diagnosed with ADHD by an outside medical provider. Whether or not that constitutes a disability that requires special education services is then a decision that's made by the committee, which of course includes the parent. Your child can have a disability or a diagnosis and still not be eligible for special education services because they can be successful without them. And of course, we want to give children the minimum amount of additional intervention for them to be successful. We don't want to be more restrictive in providing them services than is necessary. So, what is an IEP? What is an individualized educational plan? It is a written plan designed to meet a child's learning needs. And that means in every area identified. So, if your child, for example, qualifies as a student with a learning disability, they may have IEPs in, let's say, their eligibility is in reading. They would have an IEP in reading, but they also might have an IEP in behavior. If they qualify for speech services, they would have an IEP to address their speech needs. So there's not always a one-to-one correspondence between the areas where your child has an individualized educational plan and their area of eligibility. So the IEP is developed by the ARD or IEP committee, depending on which state you're in, and that requires parent input. So you would participate in the initial meeting that determines whether the child is qualified for special education and needs special ed services, and then your input would be included in whatever those goals and objectives are going to be. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what's included in an individualized educational plan. There are annual measurable educational goals. Measurable meaning my child will increase his reading fluency from 10 words a minute to 20 words a minute. That's an example. There's lots of them usually in an IEP, and they address the areas of need. If there are any areas that need related services, so related services would be things like, does my child need special education transportation to get to and from school? Does my child need occupational therapy to be successful in school, etc.? And accommodations, and some of those we've already talked about. Accommodations would be things like preferential seating, the option of taking a photo of any work written on the board because they have difficulty with handwriting, etc. Okay, progress, your child's progress will be tracked in the general curriculum. And review, an annual review ARD is required to monitor progress and write additional goals for the following year. Okay, let me clarify one thing about that. The annual review is a minimum. There must be at least one ARD meeting per year. If your child's needs are not being met to your satisfaction and you would like to request an ARD meeting sooner, you have the option of doing that. And goals are based on needs identified in the assessments over and over and over again. We go back to the assessments to determine which areas we're going to write goals and objectives for. Next slide, please. So what happens next? You actually have the implementation of the individual educational plan. For most children, these services can be provided in the general education classroom. For some children who need more intensive instruction, their IEP might be serviced in a special education classroom. And the IEP will list related services like special ed transportation, like occupational or physical therapy, needed for school success. Related services like speech therapy or special transportation obviously would take place outside the classroom. For some related services, they are actually pull-out services where the child goes like to the speech room with the speech therapist for speech. But again, the location where those services are provided is specified on the IEP itself. Sometimes speech therapy is provided in the general education classroom by the speech therapist, and sometimes the kids are pulled into the speech therapy room for their speech instruction. But the location for those related services is one of the things specified in the IEP document. Next slide, please. Okay, again, there must be at least an annual review to review the IEP and progress. It can be more often than that, but it has to be once a year at a minimum. And there is a process called a reevaluation, and you will hear it called a reeval. So when you hear that, that's what that is. At a minimum of once every 3 years, a child has to be reevaluated to determine if they continue to qualify for special education services. If a child is making sufficient progress that they can be successful without special education services, then as a result of that reevaluation, they may be dismissed, or their eligibility may be continued, depending on the outcome of that assessment. Next. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Up next, we have Adrian Gay.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys? Again, my name is Adrian Gay, and I'm just gonna hop right into it. I have over 16 years in special education. I decided to come out of the classroom and become an advocate for parents, and I also now consult with schools to make sure that their IEP special education process is up to federal guidelines. And I'm here to talk to you about advocacy for your child. I get a question all the time. People ask me, what is an advocate? An advocate is a professional who supports families in navigating the SPED process, the special education process, um, whether it be IEP or 504 plans. Um, what advocates do, they bridge the gap between families and schools to create an equitable and supportive learning environment. Advocates have a core set of core functions. They inform, support, and empower parents. They also represent the child's best interest in education in the educational setting. Next slide, please. Why does advocacy matters? Advocacy matters for several reasons. It ensures the child's with special needs receive equitable education and support. It also ensures that your child with special needs receive appropriate services and accommodations. And it levels the playing field for families navigating that complex systems. Next slide, please. The key roles of an advocate is fosters collaboration, it amplifies the child's, it gives the parents and sometimes the kids, depending on the age, a voice. Um, and it also helps parents with IEP and navigating the special education process. Next slide, please. The impact that advocacy have on school and families are it promotes inclusive practices that benefits all students, builds trust and cooperation between the families and educators, encourage a shared focus on the child's success, and for families it reduces the stress and the confusion. It reduces the stress and confusion for parents. It provides clarity, resources, and emotional support. And when I say it, I mean the advocate. The advocate you pick should be able to do all of those things. And they also should be knowledgeable in the special education process and laws as well. Next slide, please. The overall mission and long-term impact for advocacy, it provides inclusive education, highlight that advocacy contributes to systematic change and broader awareness. It empowers beyond school. No, it gives empowerment beyond school. Next slide, please. And a example of what I mean when I say it gives empowerment beyond schools is that the advocate ensures a child with special needs receive tailored support, such as life skills training and emotional development, as part of their educational plan. The educational plan is the IEP which is also known as the individual education plan. For example, a student with autism who struggles with communication and decision making skills is taught a practical skill like budgeting, navigating public transportation, and practicing workplace scenarios. Through advocacy, the services are integrated into their IEP. As a result, the child builds self confidence by mastering these skills in a supportive environment and over time develop resilience, learning to face challenges independently. And upon graduation, they are better equipped to secure a job, manage personal responsibilities, and lead a fulfilling adult life. This transformation highlights long-term impact of advocacy in fostering independence and preparing your child for success beyond school. That's an example of empowerment beyond schools. Next slide, please. And to recap what advocacy is a professional who assists parents and guardians of children with special needs in navigating the complexities of the education system. They provide support by understanding and interpreting federal and state laws, such as with the Individual with Disability Act, which is also known as IDEA, to ensure the child receives appropriate services and accommodations through an IEP, which is also an individualized education program or a 504 plan. Advocates collaborate with families, schools, and other stakeholders to ensure the child's educational rights are upheld. They attend meetings to provide guidance and empower parents to advocate effectively for their needs. The ultimate goal is to bridge gaps between families and schools, ensuring that every child with special needs has access to equitable, tailored, and high quality education. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Adrian.
No problem.
All
Have any
right.
questions? I'm here.
Awesome. And that's a thank you for saying that, Adrian. So we see your questions coming in. So make sure to continue to drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to ask our special guests at the Q&A at the end. All right, and we're heading back to Dr. Barbara.
Thank you. So, this section is on mental health and behavior supports. And before I start talking about that specifically, for those of you who are new to this area of information, I would expect you to be feeling pretty overwhelmed right now. I certainly would if I were a parent who was new to all of this. And we just want you to know that we are here for follow-up with you, and we want you to be very clear about what your rights are, what your child's rights are, and what supports are available and out there. So hang in there with this and know that we're going to get to everybody's questions. Okay, so levels of support that are available for behavior. Mental health support is a priority for all students, and it is available to all students, regardless of whether it's through response to intervention for kids in general ed, kids in 504, or kids in special education. And just so you know, this is independent of any diagnosis, disability. It is literally available to all students to meet their level of behavioral needs. Next slide, please. So just like the supports in response to intervention are tiered, so too are the supports available for behavior. So the first level of support available to all students is access to the school counselor. In my district, each campus had a full-time counselor. I understand that in other districts, that's not always the case. Sometimes the counselor is there on a part-time basis, but that would be your first go-to person if your child is having specific behavior difficulties. And as a campus school psychologist, my role in working with children in general education in particular was to be a support and a backup to the school counselor. So that's your first go-to person in the school if you're concerned about your child's mental health issues or about specific behaviors. Most schools have a school-wide or class-wide reward system. Clear classroom expectations are something that are a reasonable expectation for you to have as a parent, and the use of a school-wide or class-wide formal system like CHAMPS. Again, CHAMPS is a program that I personally particularly like because it makes the classroom expectations very clear, very consistent, and you also get consistent consequences. Next. So a second level of support is targeted at an individual student. Again, like response to intervention, like RTI, these are tailored for an individual student. And again, they are available through RTI for children in general education or for students in special education. And again, regardless of their special ed eligibility, I've provided these services to children who were speech impaired only because they were having some behavioral issues in the classroom. So again, these are available to any student. The first level is behavior accommodations, and we've talked about accommodations a little bit. These are adjustments in the approach to education, but not to the curriculum. Again, these are provided on your child's grade level. Behavior accommodations include things like strategic seating, which sometimes is near the teacher so that the teacher can redirect behavior. For one student I had, it was in the back of the classroom because he had hyperactive behaviors, and by sitting him in the back of the classroom, none of the other students were able to see when he needed to pace or he needed to move his legs while he was sitting in his chair and so forth. So for him, the best seating was in the back of the room. Assistance with organization, if your child is having trouble keeping up with their belongings or turning in assignments on time, that sort of thing. Another accommodation might be oral and written instructions. Some children learn better from what they hear, and some children learn better from what they see. And some children learn better if you combine the two. So that would be one accommodation that might be appropriate. And reminders to stay on task. So there might be a system in place between an individual student and the teacher where they have a signal between the two of them, and that serves as a reminder for the child to get back to the task at hand. Again, these are all available through special or general education. Next slide. Okay, the third level of support are more intensive. Your child might need what's called a BIP, or a behavior intervention plan. And what this is a plan to address specific behaviors, usually more intense, and it identifies the goals and the objectives and the means that are going to be used for that, the reinforcement system, and how progress is going to be determined. In my district, and I cannot speak for anyone else, we had a procedure called ongoing consultation with the campus LSSP. And for those of you who are not familiar with initials, that stands for Licensed Specialist in School Psychology. So basically, that's your school psychologist. And what I provided in doing an ongoing consultation was mostly consulting with the classroom teacher or the school counselor or the administrators, rather than working directly with the child. So the child might be engaging in certain behaviors. I might do a classroom observation so I could see the context, and then provide the teachers with some ideas for interventions. The two things that are only available through special education are a behavior IEP, and again, that's individual educational plan, And in fact, if a child has a behavior intervention plan through special ed, they must have a behavior IEP. That's where the monitoring part comes in to see how the child's behavior is progressing. But that's only available through special education, but it is available for any eligibility. And the last service is counseling as a related service. And again, that would require an individual education plan that identifies specific goals and objectives for the counseling. Let me add a couple of things about that. First of all, the counseling has to be school related. So a child would not qualify for counseling if he's having behavior issues in the family and the family would like some counseling to address that. It has to be impacting the child's ability to be successful in school. And one of the things we didn't talk about is a concept called LRE. And if you are overwhelmed with initials, it's for good reason. LRE stands for least restrictive environment. We always want the child to be in the least restrictive environment for them to be successful. In other words, the least amount of support services we can provide them and still have them be successful, the better. We want them educationally to be serviced as much as all other children as possible. So, counseling as a related service is considered the most restrictive kind of behavioral support because it requires that the child be pulled from the general ed classroom for those services to be provided one-on-one. In my district's case, with the campus LSSP. Other districts might have behavior specialists or special education counselors who implement the IEP. So not everywhere is it done by the school psychologist, but it does require being pulled out because it has to be completely confidential. So it's not something you can do in the classroom. So as a result of that, whatever time is being spent in counseling is time that the child is missing being in the general education or special education classroom and receiving educational instruction. And again, the first thing to remember about this whole process is it's about enabling the child to be successful in school. So if we are providing a service that requires removing them from instruction, we want that really to be as a last resort. And that would be true for any service, for occupational therapy, for speech therapy, whatever the service is that's being provided. If they're being pulled out of the classroom for that service to be provided, it means they're missing instruction. So the service has to be so necessary for them to be successful that it's worth that trade-off. Next slide, please. Okay, that's it for my part.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. All right, so up next we have Veronica Gilmore Ford.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We've heard a lot of useful information. As a matter of fact, I learned a lot of new things here as well. So thank all of you. My name is Veronica Ford. I am a project management professional. I do project management consulting for individuals and businesses. And basically what that means is I help businesses and individuals identify, organize, and connect the actions, the tasks, and the individuals they need to achieve their company goals. My arm in the individualized arm of that is a clear journey. That's where my company goes into schools and works with children and individuals to help them do the same thing. Help them set goals, identify tasks, and connect the actions they need to take to reach those goals. I'm also the mother of an adopted daughter with ADHD and dyslexia. I've fostered others, so I have ample experience in supporting our children to getting a quality education. And one thing I've learned is a good set of tools for organization is critical for both you as a parent and for your child in helping them be successful. Next slide, please. So I want to talk briefly about 3 major actions you want to take to help your child succeed. Number 1 is you want to make sure you are gathering and organizing your paperwork. Number 2, you want to be proactive. And number 3, you want to use some of the tools that are available at your disposal to support you. So let me first talk about organizing the paperwork. Keep all your documents together, gather them up, use a clear filing structure and system. Next slide, please. Just to give you an example, this is kind of how things are organized in my household as I work through supporting my daughter in the system. I basically have a folder for each school year, and within the folder, I have all these various folders. My contact list, and the contact list is everybody that's involved in my child's education. That's my advocate, that's my the counselors, that's the special ed teachers, etc. I make sure I have their email addresses, their phone numbers, their names, their titles, and for teachers specifically, the best time to contact them, the best method to contact them. Oftentimes it's kind of hard to get in touch with them during the school day. So when do you have a break? When is your lunch, etc. I have a folder for referrals, a folder for the evaluations, disciplinary log, and a folder for my IEP plan and records. I also have a general folder where I keep meeting notes, documentation such as the useful information we've gotten here, and a folder for correspondence and any legal documents that I need to have. I keep all of this in 2 places. I have it in OneDrive in folders, but I also, so that I can get to it as needed. But there's usually a lot of emails floating around. So in my emails as well, I have links to this information. That means no matter where I am with OneDrive, I can get to that information. You might use Google Drive, whatever shared drive you use out in the cloud is a good place to store this information. On your hard drive, doesn't help you. If it's in a cloud supported solution, you can get to it from your phone. If you're on a call on your phone, you can get to it from email. You can get to it whenever you need it. Next slide, please. I want to talk about being proactive. So it is important that you are the leader in your child's care. The school provides support. There is support from the advocacy system. If you have a foster child or if you're fostering to adopt, there's support from those systems. Use all of those, but you need to be the lead. So my recommendation is that you be proactive. Get teacher information early on, as I mentioned. Set for yourself a regular day and time of the week to review your students' progress. Log into whatever tools they use at your school to keep track of what's going on and make sure you talk to your child about what's going on. Schedule parent-teacher conferences early. It's important that you make sure you know who the teachers are and you kind of get an idea of their teaching style as you talk to them, but you also want to make sure they understand your students' learning style. I heard one of the speakers earlier mention your student may be auditory, your student may be visual, but it's important that you communicate that. Your art meetings, you can schedule those when you need them. I try to schedule one at the beginning of the year and one in the middle of the school year. That's what works best for me. I think regularly they do them annually, but you can request one as you need it. And follow up. After your meetings or after your advocacy meetings, you'll get a lot of information, a lot of actions. So it's important that you follow up with the teachers and see how those are going. It's important that you follow up with your student. They'll give you some goals and you want to make sure you have a plan in your own home to help those goals get reached. As part of being proactive, I would recommend you schedule a time to prepare and compile all this documentation for your ARD meeting. If it's all organized in one central location, and if it's all organized in a way that best supports you, you won't have any problem doing that. If it's something that needs to be signed, just go ahead and put that on your schedule and make sure you get that signed and taken care of in plenty of time before your meeting. If it's something that needs to be signed after and sent in, just make sure you do that immediately so it doesn't get lost and doesn't get forgotten. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'll recommend use your tools. This is hard. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is what we use in our house. At the top is a goals section, and it's our 7th grade goals. The bottom section of this is actions that we need to take. It has the date and the title of any meetings. And this always stays on our wall. The calendar is the bottom part, and it rotates, of course, with each month. But for the whole year, I always see the top part where I know what we need to do to help make sure we have success in the 7th grade. And lastly, I just want to recommend you use your tools. I think I mentioned OneDrive and some of the Google Drives and some of the cloud solutions that are out there, but also use productivity apps. There are lists, Microsoft To Do, Trello, Notion. These are all apps that can be loaded on your phone where you can put a list of tasks. You can also use your phone calendar. There is a widget tool that makes your phone calendar the first thing you see when you're on your phone. You can share that calendar with the people in your household, including your kiddo. You can use the widget calendar to mark your dates, set alarms, and you can keep track of everything that you have going on. Additionally, in your online calendar, you can put a link to whatever document you need. If you have a meeting coming up and you want to make sure you have all those documents there at your disposal, put a link in that calendar so that you can get to it. The bottom line mentioned again is to make sure we're reaching our goal, and the goal of all of this is so that we see where we're going the whole length of the journey. And that's it. Thanks a lot. Next slide.
Thank you, Veronica. And now we'll have Dr. Linda.
Hello, everyone. I'm exhausted. That was a lot of information, but I hope it was good information for everyone and you had an opportunity to write down many notes. We've been answering some questions as we go along. We ask that you put your questions in the Q&A area so that it's easier to access and we can respond back to you. All the questions that have been asked, we'll try to email the responses to you in a group email. But I want to thank our wonderful panel for sharing such valuable information today. To Victoria as our moderator, we couldn't do this without you. And to my board member, Treasurer Charlene Silcott, for supporting us in person. To those in attendance, let us know if you found this helpful by typing yes in the chat or even sharing a fun, happy emoji. If you got a sad one, we'll take that too. And as you respond, I just want to do a quick recap. We provide a wealth of resources and information to empower you in navigating your child's education journey. This webinar has been recorded and you'll receive the recording link once it's ready. All questions submitted during the webinar will be saved and we'll ensure everyone receives a response. And finally, I'd like to share more information about what our nonprofit does. We provide tutorials for students with learning disabilities and differences, tutorials for high school students struggling in a particular subject, We do college preparation, which is tutorials for SATs, helping them with essays, admissions, college selections, because that's very important for our children to they select the correct college for them that fits their personality and their needs, and much more. Providing assistance to parents on maneuvering the process, and this is what we're doing today. And we also are more than a tutoring service. We care about the family because the family is important to the student and the student is important to the family, and it affects each other. We are celebrating 15 years in the business, and this is our event in honoring those years of service. Next slide. We're also coming up in 2025. We're looking to do another webinar addressing autism, emotional behavior, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and much more. So if you want to keep up with anything, just stay tuned to our website. I will also forward updates to you through the email system. Next slide. We're also planning on workshops, and these workshops will be done in small groups so that you can get a little bit more individual attention and address your child more personally. And so we'll have workshops on understanding the diagnostic examination and the ORAT meetings, individual educational plans. If you want to bring your child's educational plan to the workshop and go through it with the person that is in charge of that workshop. Same thing as 504 plan. You can bring your child's information, personal information regarding the 504 plan and have a little bit more direct information and discussion, and also how to prepare for your ORAT meetings. Next slide. Also leveling up so that your child may be moving from elementary school to middle school or from middle school to high school. How does that IEP or 504 work? And so we'll talk about that, as well as what happens when they're out of school. They have that high school degree. What do we do next? What about college? How does that affect my child when they attend college? So that comes in also after diploma is life skills, teaching them financial literacy, teaching them how to be independent on their own if they decide to go into college or live in their own apartment. Also trade skills. Everyone's does not want to go to college, but they need to have a trade. And so we can talk to them about how to what trade skills they can address. There's also in their plan in high school, providing them with trade skill opportunities. And of course, college admissions. We will help them choose the right school, what they need to do, give them the steps, and anything else that they need to know. Now, these workshops will not be free, but it will be a nominal fee. And so we're still in developing stage of that, but we will provide information and details on that by the new year. The next slide. One-on-one consultations. If you're interested in one-on-one consultations with our speakers, they will put their information again in the chat, and you can do, each one can do that now, the contact information. And also it will be on our website that you can get that information and link to them also. Next slide. Okay. Now, before we read the Q&A questions or open up for questions, I just want to again thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. There will be a survey appearing at the end of this webinar, and I'd be most appreciative if you would answer that. It would help us understand how our webinar was important to you and that information we provided fit your needs, or if there's anything that we should do better, we would appreciate it. And for right now, Victoria, I'll turn over the questions answer area for you. All presenters, if you will, please come on board, and you may show your face if you like, and we will remove the PowerPoint.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Linda. So as our speakers are coming back. I already see that there have been some questions asked and some questions answered, but we're going to go through those and highlight some questions and give our speakers an opportunity to just reiterate what they said or to add to it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with the first question. So, what if your child has a 504 plan, but the plan, in my opinion, is a general one? So, as a parent, you feel as though changes need to be made, but you, as a parent, are not certain about the specific changes that need to be made and can be made. And there's a concern that the teachers may not know as well due to lack of knowledge and attention. So, anyone want to give an update on that or response?
So I can start from a regulatory requirement and then I'll let the other panelists talk more about the details. So in this case, if you have a plan and like you said, it's a general one and it's kind of ambiguous, you're not sure. We talked about that earlier. You have a couple options. You can request an amendment to the plan to say, hey, can you give me an itemized structure of what you're trying to say? Because maybe that can provide a clear guidance. Or, for example, you can contact an attorney, you can hire a consultant. There are certain panelists in the chat who can assist you, and they can kind of walk you through to help you understand what that plan looks like. Because ultimately, the law states that the plan must be clear, must provide a clear language, you must be able to understand it. So you're not able to understand it, you need to let them know, like, hey, according to the federal standard, it's ambiguous. I need you to identify exactly what this is because I don't really understand what's going on, and I can't even assess what changes I need to make for my child. And I think you start there and you ask them to, like I said again, just identify, itemize it out so they can help you. And then, of course, like we talked about, if they deny, then you go through the whole process. But have an attorney or a consultant to assist you through that process if it becomes very tedious with the school or the agency to do that. That's a way that you can assist.
Thank you, Tamisha. Anyone else want to jump in on that? All
And
right.
I suggest going back to the school and having a meeting because you really want to get along with these people. Bring your suggestions. Talk to the sped teacher. They can be at these meetings. I know that the child is not identified, but I will absolutely start with the school first. Go to the AP, go to the teachers, ask them what's working, bring your own recommendations, and y'all can have a really well thought out conversation before you start, just deciding that they don't want to do it. Because it is so much better if you get along with everybody. And I need you to go in there as sweet as possible. Please, please, no frowns, only smiles. I promise you, these people will accommodate you if you come in there with the right attitude. I mean, we get yelled at all day. Sometimes putting a little sugar on it will get you every little thing that you want for your child. I promise. I'm in the school every day. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Lakeisha. All right. And I saw, Dr. O, that you wrote back in the chat as well. So to move to the next question. So my child is in a 19 plus program that the school provides called ATS, Adult Transition Services. Has anyone heard of this?
Yes, I mean, from like again, the legal standpoint, I let the panelists know, but it's more so like a transitional service for your child who's going into adult life. So they may need additional services. But I guess it's really, I don't know what state this person was asking for. I think it just depends. So I know this program is actually funded, for example, by Medicaid. So you can get additional resources there. Not to mention, you can also, your school should, because I mean, you can pull up some websites, they should have some transitional services, resources as well. So I don't know, but we do kind of know about that, but I think it really depends on what your concern is. But kind of like they said, just go to the school. You're in Austin, I see. So yeah, so whatever that school is, you just say, hey, I know my child is on this particular program. What are the additional resources? do I have? Because there's a couple websites out there, and they can kind of direct you and let you know what those additional transitional services are. He hasn't. So kind of like they said earlier, you want to have a meeting. I know I'm sure he's probably 18 or above. So if they say that you haven't met the requirements, that's kind of like you said, you want to come together and have a meeting and say, hey, under the law, we need to have a meeting. You're saying one thing, but however, we saying one thing, we need to come to a consensus. We just want to make sure we understand what's going on. And I think that's critical. Just request a meeting, understanding of what the goals that they're saying that he has or has not met, and vice versa. And then just come to an agreement. Because, for example, you could provide proof and evidence if your child is stating in Austin, for example, that, oh, I haven't met this, but the school is stating X, Y, and Z. So I think it's critical to have those meetings, bring the evidence. If you have to bring a representative, you can. But I think just talking to them to try to figure out what it is. And, he could actually bring you as his representative, or she, and you guys can start from there. And I think that's the first standpoint.
Thank you, Tamisha. All right, we're gonna go. So as I transition to the next question, I do see questions about will the recording be available or the PowerPoint presentation. So the recording will be available on the website, but as of right now, no slides. So we will make sure I have that recording available. All right. So I'm coming on down. So I see all the smiley faces that you truly enjoyed the program. And then our speakers dropped their information in the chat. So thank you for that. And speakers, make sure when you drop your information in, change the to everyone
So
to make sure that they get it. Go
I
ahead.
think there was one more question. I think there was I think it was already answered, but I think it's a good question we can probably bring up about a child being on a 504 plan without the parents' consent. And then they were below the age of 18. And then the school took them off. So maybe we can kind of high level talk about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Go ahead.
so I guess there was I think it was in a separate chat. I think they directed it at certain parties, but basically, kind of like we said earlier, if your child is below the age of 18, you have to consent in writing. And so let's say I have a child, I have a daughter, for example, and the school put her on a plan and I didn't consent to it, then theoretically you're violating my child's rights, right? That's a violation of my child's rights. So that's when you have to go to the school and say, I didn't consent to this. What is going on? And then they have to rectify that matter. And also, you need to make sure they remove that from all of your child's educational records. So you need to, in this case, request a meeting with the school, ask to review the records, ask to have a copy of it, tell them you did not provide consent, and that you want it to be removed from the school record. Because of course, we know the educational record follow your children forever. And so I think that's critical. But again, you always want to make sure you have consent. And like I have a daughter, so I always typically request to look at her educational record just randomly. So I do advise maybe a couple times, maybe every quarter, to just say, hey, can I get a copy of my child's educational record? So you can make sure that nothing's in there that you didn't agree to.
All right. Thank you, Tamisha.
Victoria,
Yeah. Can you hear me,
there was a
Dr.
question asked
Barbara?
by Angela. I don't know if she's still on, but she mentioned something about having a 3-year-old that might need services. Angela, if you're still on, I wanted to let you know that you can contact your home campus, whatever campus that child would go to if he or she were kindergarten age, and ask to speak to the diagnostician and request that an evaluation be done. Depending on the eligibility, children are eligible for special education services once they've had their 3rd birthday. So if you already have a 3-year-old that you're wondering about or have concerns about, be sure and get in touch with the diagnostician on your home campus and request that assessment, because what we find is the earlier the interventions, the better the outcome. So just know that that's available for you from the time the child turns 3. In fact, we have had some kids whose parents requested the assessment when they were a late 2-year-old. And then those services began almost immediately once the child turned 3. So just know that that's available. I hope you're still on, but if you're not, hopefully this information will get to you. Okay.
Thank you. And so I'm going to hop to the Q&A box. So if you have any more questions, please enter into the Q&A box. So a question was asked, if my child has severe behavioral issues, but he is smart and makes great conversations, can I ask only for FBI assessment? If yes, what does that entail?
Only what assessment? I'm sorry, I missed that.
They wrote FBI, but is there something else? Just
They're probably asking for a functional behavioral assessment.
okay,
That's for my assumption, FBA.
FBA.
Yeah.
Any
Okay,
comments about that?
so
That's
if
usually a question for our
the
psych,
child,
so I'm really gonna get at the Dr. Barbara.
if, if the child is already in special education, with a behavioral eligibility like emotional disturbance or autism or OHI for ADHD, and you're thinking the child needs more in the way of behavioral interventions, you can request, as Lakeisha mentioned, you can request something called a functional behavior assessment or FBA. And what's involved in that is looking at the child's behaviors, how those behaviors are being reinforced in the school system, in what context they take place, and then from the FBA, behavior intervention plan would be generated with goals and objectives and methods specific to your child. Does that address your question? Okay, so
Like
it's for a 4-year-old. When you say no IEP, do you mean the child is not in special education at this time? I know this is kind of weird, but if the child is already in special ed, you can ask for the FBA. If they are not, then again, like the 3-year-old, go through your homeschool diagnostician and request an assessment. And that will include a behavior component. If it's warranted, the campus school psychologist would get involved with that. So I hope that addresses your question. But
thank you,
again,
Doc.
if the child is enrolled in school and having behavior concerns, you would want to start with response to intervention, because like everyone else has talked about, the special ed process takes time. The school has 15 school days to respond to your request for assessment. Then they have 45 calendar days to get the assessment done. Then they have 30 school days to hold the ARD meeting. You're looking at almost a semester. And if you start with the response to intervention process while the child is still in general ed, even if the referral is in process, you can get some interventions in place without waiting all that time. So that's where I'd start. Even if you're going to request an assessment, I would still want RTI interventions to be in place in the meantime, to the extent that they might be helpful. So I would be doing both things at the same time. Lakeisha, you're nodding. Does that sound right to you?
I agree with you 100%. Most campuses have a behavior interventionist. And they have a student assistance committee, and you ask for a referral, you ask the teacher to make a referral. If the
Yeah,
4-year-old is in school, but I would start with an evaluation.
You don't want to wait for that
No,
whole process to be finished
no,
for some
no.
interventions to get started. So, go
Not
ahead.
immediately. Okay, she's put another question there.
I see it. The
Yeah.
school is required to do an evaluation within 45 calendar days. That's not what I would call immediately if my child
Right.
were having severe behavior concerns.
Yes.
I don't know what you mean by immediately, but that wouldn't be my idea of immediately. So if you want some things put into place pronto, start with the general ed process while the referral is in progress through the system. Okay? I hope that's helpful.
I wanted to clarify something on the 45 days, because the law is kind of different. So like, for example, 45 days legally would be include Monday through Friday or Sunday, and then like that's calendar days, but business days would be Monday through Friday. So I think you should talk to the school and ask them, do you do working days or do you do 45 days? Because ultimately if you just do it Monday through Friday and they say 45 days, you're going to miss that deadline because you're going to give yourself more time. So it's critical to ask them, is this working days Monday through Friday or is this calendar days Monday through Sunday? Because then that's how you know how to start your clock. And I think that's critical. So make sure you ask because there can be a different interpretation depending on the school and the district.
And again, that's going to vary by state. That's a state law decision. So again, I believe that information will be on your consent form and that will be specified. But again, make sure you're clear about the date by which the assessment has to be completed. And then they still have time to hold the IEP meeting. So if your
Yes.
child is having severe behavior problems, I wouldn't wait for the special ed process to unroll before I requested assistance. I would do that through the general ed process in the meantime, while the referral is in the works. Oops.
All right. So thank you in the chat. So as I'm reading this final question, I believe Tamisha, this is you already spoke about this, but I'll read out the scenario just so everyone else hears, and then our guests can comment on it. And then during that time, if Dr. Linda can join us back on the screen or give some final comments. But I'll read out the last question first before we do that. So, does parental consent go away when student is a certain age? Now, in this scenario, the child was 16, a sophomore. My high schooler had a 501 placed by her school counselor because she had autism. My child has never had an autism diagnosis from any professional ever. When I asked her counselor, she said she put in place because my child said she was autistic. And due to counselor student confidentiality, she didn't have to inform us parents. She had no doctor contact confirmation regarding autism, no referral, no evaluation, no notice to us parents, nothing. When I spoke to the principal, they removed the 504 plan and didn't talk about it again. What happened here? Just talk through that scenario, please.
So yeah, so kind of like we're stating here, the reason why this is just an assumption, but I'm talking about from the law. I would say they removed that because they knew they violated your child's rights. Because ultimately, like we stated, before evaluation or reevaluation, before they can actually confirm your child has a disability and make these things accommodations, they have to get your consent, and your consent must be in writing. Can't be an oral, so it has to be a consent. So if you stated like that you didn't know, only your child did it. Your child was under the age of 18. So your child can speak for on their behalf. So the student or this teacher, I'm sorry, what they should have done, or the school, right? They could have had a discussion with you and said, "Hey, we noticed we've seen some concerns. Do you approve for us to evaluate your child to see if she might have X, Y, and Z?" Or whatever case may be. You still have to be cognizant about it because you don't want to be discriminatory as if you're stigmatizing a child that doesn't have a certain disability. And then from there, you'll say, yes, send me an email. I can have your email so I can send it in writing so I can give my consent in writing. So that's kind of what happened in that case. And that's when I stated earlier that in this case, it was documenting your child's record, right? And then they removed it, but you need to get a copy of your child's record to make sure that it's removed from the educational records. We talked about that earlier. You don't want any type of stigmatism on your child if you ultimately don't agree with it. If you do think that your child has autism, then you go through those steps like we talked about. But there was a violation of your child's potentially rights, allegedly, in this case. So you've got to be cognizant of those things. But like I said, quarterly, just ask for a copy of your child's records if you can to just make sure it's distinct with what you know. Um, and I think I hope I answered that question, but that's kind of what happened there.
Thank you. And we had a question to come into the chat. Are the timeframes for requesting and or implementing a 504 plan the same as an IEP plan?
So I can talk about the IEP, and I think we have another panelist talked about the 504, and we can kind of tell you. But I think so in the IEP, like we talked about earlier, the school must comply with certain requirements, and there is a certain time frame, and it's a reasonable time. So there's like a, but there's different time frames. So I think it depends, because that's the kind of broad question in a sense. It depends on what step maybe that you're in within the plan, right? Because it can be an initial, it can be a response, it can be all these things. So I would say it would be different based on the plan, but you need to assess what those time frames are at every step. And when you get the plan, you need to look at all those things and make sure you follow those plans, because it can be a 15-day at this point, a 45-day. I think one of the panelists spoke about it, but you just need to assess what those timeframes are for each plan. If that makes sense, when they provide that to you.
Thank you. Any additional comments on that from the speakers?
I won't tell her about specific dates because just like Ms. Tamisha said, it's different with school districts, but typically a 504 plan is gonna go way faster. I mean, if you having issues, you can still get the same accommodations. You just, if you don't, your kid does not need supplement or extra anything, go with a 504 plan. As a matter of fact, we'll use results of a 504 plan to validate the reason for doing an evaluation. So if you're trying to get services quickly, do the 504 plan. And sometimes kids only need accommodations and not specialized instruction. It's what I would prefer that they do first anyways. It's just better, more information for us to use to do the FIE, you know.
So I guess to add to that, do you mind also talking about how the 504 plan goes like to with kids in college? I know we had some questions about that, because so the IDA, right, typically doesn't apply after graduation, but the 504 follows with college. And you know, they have to work with the College of Disability at the university, because I think there's a person who has a child in transitional services. I don't know if you got information on that, I think.
Well, that also depends state to state. Here in Texas, we seem to be a little bit more strict about some rules, but I lived in Pennsylvania and for a while, and I can tell you that a 504 plan or evaluation, both of them apply to college also. Sometimes they may want to do their own brief assessment, but if your child needs accommodations and you can prove it, both should apply. In Texas, I have done evaluations for juniors and seniors where they could take to college and use for accommodations, but not so much 504 plans. But I think that's state to state, you know.
All right. Well, let's see if Dr. Linda's going to hop back on while she does that. Any closing comments or getting to the end here? I believe you addressed all the questions. We just want to thank all of our speakers today. Did anyone have any closing comments? Any speakers? Any final word you have to say before we close out today? And there goes Dr. Linda. If
Okay,
not,
thank you,
Dr. Linda, over
One,
to you.
one comment.
Okay, good.
I need more time. I can talk about this all day, and I would love to give parents more details, because one of the biggest issue I found when doing this job is they don't fully understand the evaluation. They have all of that interesting information, but they have no idea what it means. And I realize some diagnosticians may not be as talky as I can be at times, but I really like to pull out organizers and stuff to really make parents understand. And this is not just pertinent in the schools. If you have a tutor, that information can be shared with the tutor. If you have, it's just a big old document with a crazy lot of information, and I wish I had more time to explain it in detail. But that's all. Y'all can see that I talk too much. That's all right. I'm all right with that. I just like giving parents
Well, Lakeisha,
information.
well, Lakeisha, I am providing that platform through our workshops. So I will be touching and reaching, calling you. Thank you. I love it. You all have done an awesome job. This was a lot of months of preparing, and I thank you all for your patience with me and gathering. But one thing about it that What God has placed his hand upon, it shall be. And I want to thank you all for that. We do have door prize, and I do want to announce that. And because the person is on board, so I need to switch back to my screen. Hold on. Nicole Pate, I think I saw you. You wave at me or something? Are you still on, Nicole? Oh, okay, Nicole's gone then. Well, okay then. I'm gonna go through and we'll see what happens with the door prizes. Y'all may get a surprise in your email. I appreciate you all coming. Remember to take the survey and have a great and blessed day.
Thank you.
And you can go to our website and get the all the speakers' information for further information. All right. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.